Hi, welcome to Come to 10 Contemporary Business Thinking. This is class number 4 on strategy, resources, and capabilities, and we'll also be discussing quality of evidence in a subsequent video. So the article that you had to read for today's class is about Barney. Barney wrote an article on strategy, and he discusses resources and capabilities. So here we have Jay Barney in action. We can see he looks quite passionate. Jay Barney is one of the most important contributors to the field of strategy that we have these days. He's a professor at Fisher College at Ohio State University. Barney's article starts with a SWOT framework. The SWOT analysis is a traditional tool that is used in strategic analysis. It's used by many organizations, and you're going to look at the SWOT analysis in greater detail as you go further along in your studies. Very important, the SWOT analysis is not Barney's theory. Barney proposes a framework to look at a part of the SWOT analysis. So the SWOT framework has two components. It looks at the internal environment of the organization and also at the external environment of the organization. So the internal environment, where we can look at the strengths and the weaknesses of the organization. So we look at the resources and capabilities that will help the firm be competitive. When we look at the external environment, we're looking at society, at the environment, at the competitors, at the industry, at the government regulation. So all the opportunities and threats that exist for a specific organization. But I have to repeat that. The SWOT framework is not Barney's theory. Barney's proposing a theory that will look at specifically at the internal environment of the organization. So Barney's article, looking inside from competitive advantage, it provides a tool to assess the internal environment of the organization, more specifically, the resources and the capabilities that the organization has. So what are some of Barney's major claims? Well, for one, we know that the most careful and complete analysis of a firm's environments, at a competitive environment, cannot by itself explain their success. So what Barney is saying here is that looking at the external environment of the organization is not enough. Looking at the opportunities and the threats, it's great, it's a good thing to do, and organizations should do it, but it's not enough to assess whether or not a firm will be competitive. So what strategists have to do is to look at the analyze and look at the competitive implication of the firm's internal strengths and weaknesses. So look at the internal environment. So an organization will be successful if, and only if, it has resources with the right attributes and characteristics. That's what Barney is saying. So what are those right attributes and characteristics? So Barney says that in order for a firm to have a competitive advantage and a sustained competitive advantage, the resources and capabilities that it has should be valuable, rare, inimitable, and organized in such a way that will allow the organization to exploit its full potential. So let's look at some of the firm's resources and capabilities. So any firm will have multiple resources and capabilities, and these resources and capabilities can be either financial, physical, human, or organizational. It is used by the firm to develop and manufacture different products and services that they will offer to its customers. So when we talk about financial resources, we can talk about the debt that the organization has, the equity, the retained earnings, the profits, and so on and so forth. In terms of physical resources, we can look at the machines, we can look at the facilities, at the building that the organization owns. In terms of human resources, we can look at the employee's experience, the knowledge, the judgment, the wisdom, the network that all the employees have within themselves. And in terms of organizational resources, we can look at the history, the culture, the structure, the trust, and so on and so forth. All of these resources and capabilities will help the organization obtain a competitive advantage. So there are 4 important questions that an organization should ask itself concerning the resources and capabilities. The first one is the question of value. So does the organization's resources and capabilities enable the organization to exploit an opportunity and or neutralize a threat? So is this resource helping the organization in such a way that the organization can either exploit an opportunity or neutralize a threat? So that's the first question to ask. The second question is a question of rareness. So how many other firms have these valuable resources and capabilities? So how many other organizations have the exact same resources and capabilities? Obviously, if many organizations have the same resources, then it's not so rare, and it's not so good for the competitive advantage of an organization. So the rarer it is, the better it is for the organization. In terms of imitability, the organization should ask itself, how difficult is it to imitate this resource, and how costly it is to imitate the resource. So do firms without a resource or capability face a cost disadvantage in obtaining it compared to a firm that already possesses it? And the last question is a question of organization. This is the only question that really relates to the organization and not to the resource or capabilities. So in terms of the organization itself, is it well organized enough to exploit the full potential that the resource and capabilities provide to the organization? So in terms of imitability, there are three elements that we should consider when assessing the imitability. One of them is history. So what happened during the organization's existence that helped the organization become successful? Perhaps a contract was awarded in its history that helped the organization become successful and really start being very competitive. So when we talk about history, we're really talking about being at the right place at the right time. So what helped the organization throughout its existence become more successful? Secondly, we can also look at the small decisions that are taken on a day-to-day basis. So there are a lot of decisions that are taken on a day-to-day basis that we don't usually assess, that we don't usually analyze and see whether or not they're helping the organization. But all those small decisions that are taken by many employees within the organization will help the organization become more successful. And I'm talking about small decisions such as an employee making a small suggestions, giving a small idea, and this idea being adopted, or whether or not when a specific employee work on, let's say, building a car and decides to just screw a little tighter. And all of these little small decisions taken by all of the employees will help the organization be more successful. Lastly, the importance of socially complex resources. When we talk about socially complex resources, we're referring to a reputation, trust, teamwork that exists between employees, the culture of the organization. All of these elements are quite difficult to imitate and will help the organization become more successful. So how do we apply the VRIO framework? So VRIO framework is Barney's framework to assess the internal environment of the organization, to assess the strengths and the weaknesses. So VRIO stands for the four questions: V for value, R for rare, I for imitability, and O for organization. So the first thing we have to do is select one resource, and then we'll assess that resource. So for instance, if you take one resource such as equity, that's a financial resource. So the first thing you have to do is select a resource, and then you assess what kind of resource it is. Is it a financial resource, a physical resource, a human resource, or an organizational resource? Once you've selected that resource, then you start the VRIO analysis. So first you'll ask about value, because that's the first question. So is this resource valuable? If it's not valuable, the company will be at a competitive disadvantage. So something has to be done. Should either modify that resource or get rid of it or get another resource that will help the organization obtain value for that resource. If it's valuable, that's great. That's what we want. Next, we have to ask a second question about rarity. Is it rare? Well, if it's not rare, the organization will have competitive parity. So equality with other organizations. So other organizations might have that similar resource that's valuable, which is great to have. But if it's not rare, it's not helping the organization obtain a competitive advantage. They will be at competitive parity. If it's valuable and rare, now we're talking about a competitive advantage, at least temporarily. So it might not be sustained over long term, but at least it will be a temporary competitive advantage because the resource is valuable and it's rare. Now we'll add the third question, the question of imitability. So if the resource is valuable and it's rare, but it's costly to imitate, but not costly to imitate, I should say. Sorry about that. Then the advantage will be temporary because other organizations, they will hurry up and try to imitate that resource. So they will obtain valuable and rare themselves, and then your resource will not be inimitable anymore. What an organization should aim for is to have a resource that's valuable, rare, and costly to imitate. If it's costly or difficult to imitate, then the organization will obtain a sustained competitive advantage. And that sustained competitive advantage will be there only if the organization is properly organized. So we need to look internally at the organization as well. So now the entire framework with the 4 questions. Is this resource valuable? Is it rare? Is it hard to imitate or costly to imitate? And are we organized properly to take advantage of this resource? So that's the summary of RIO framework, the summary of the 4 questions that we should be asking when we're assessing resources and capabilities of an organization. So an organization should, on a regular basis, look at its internal environment, look at its strengths and weaknesses, and look at assessing the resources and capabilities, and ask whether or not the resources and valuable resources and capabilities provide a competitive advantage. So ask, is this resource valuable? Is it rare? Is it costly and or difficult to imitate? And is it organized properly? And what we should aim for is obtain a yes to all 4 questions, because then the organization will have a sustained competitive advantage. And if we don't obtain yes to all the 4 questions, then it's an indication that something needs to be done, that something needs to be modified, something needs to be changed, something needs to be, we need to get rid of a resource and change it and acquire a new one, and so on and so forth. So just to repeat, the aim of an organization should be, in order to have a sustained competitive advantage, to answer yes to all of the 4 RIO questions for each of its resources and capabilities. So say yes, it's valuable, yes, it's rare, yes, it's hard and costly to imitate, and yes, we are organized properly so we can take full advantage of our resources and capabilities, and we can be successful and have a sustained competitive advantage.